As the surge in house prices continues, I'm joined now by a man who's stepping back from the world of property. Mark FitzGerald is retiring, or has retired now, as the chief executive of the biggest player in the Irish residential market after 35 years. He's been chief executive and chair of Sherry FitzGerald. Mark FitzGerald, good morning. Thank you for coming in.
Good morning, Sean.
You're not leaving altogether. You're staying on as chair.
No, I'm staying as chairman of the company, so it's nice to have a continuing involvement, but won't be as busy as I was in the past.
You became an estate agent straight out of school. What attracted you to property?
Well, I suppose I started being interested in property and houses when I was 10 years of age. Much to my parents' wonder, I discovered a street directory in my father's office, an Old Tom's directory, I think about 1926, and I started looking and seeing where people lived and the roads they lived on and how people moved around, and then I started probably asking my father about the nature of roads.
Your father, of course, being Garrett FitzGerald.
Yeah, so he kind of filled me in. Well, that was a Methodist road, and I said, why was it a Methodist road? And he explained, and all that type of thing. So I became slightly intrigued by it. Now, was interested in sport, and I had Skate Extra and all that, but I decided I wanted to be an auctioneer. I suppose I wasn't. I could have been an architect, but I wasn't artistic and I wasn't in any way numerate, so I suppose auctioneering was an alternative, so that's what I wanted to do from when I was aged about 10.
But Garrett was an academic to his fingertips, and was like the bit about you coming across an Old Tom's directory would be your father's son in that respect, delving into the detail of.
I think sometimes he probably thought I'd be swapped as a baby, but I suppose that aspect, that sort of curiosity about things are slightly.
But did university or third level education have no appeal for you? Or
well, I suppose I didn't. The sort of effort I put into school wasn't as great as it should be, because I was pretty clear what I wanted to do. So let's say we didn't quite agree terms at the university. I wasn't particularly intent to go to university. I just wanted to start into auctioneering, and that's what I did when I was 18.
And how quickly were you then buying and selling houses, or selling houses?
Once you had a driving license, which you had, you were in the market immediately. So within weeks, I was showing houses and selling houses.
Are there particular techniques that you would have used or learned, tricks of the trade?
Well, I suppose getting on with people and being open with people and giving them good advice, and obviously having the empathy, but also being efficient. I suppose you do need to be. Some people are empathetic, aren't efficient, and some people are efficient, aren't empathetic. But you probably need to be both to be a good auctioneer. And
I suppose you have to dampen people's expectations at times. So that hasn't always been the case, or maybe it has in times of boom or bust. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, in times of boom, people want to very much get the best price of their house, and it's a challenging enough environment. And then when things go backwards, as they did so tragically go backwards in Ireland, our people were probably more like general practitioners than they were estate agents. They were, there was a lot of hand-holding, so it wasn't about getting the best price for the house, it was about getting the house sold if they needed it sold, and what price could we get. What about the levels achieved in some sales? I mean, were you ever shocked by how high a house went? I know,
I was shocked, particularly probably in 2005 with the sale of Walford was one, I think in June 2005. Which
that's on Shrewsbury Road, the Sean Dunn house?
Yeah.
The 58 million?
58 million, yeah.
What did you think that was going to go for?
Well, I remember walking down the garden, two of my colleagues, Peter Lynch and Simon Enser, and I asked them, what do you think it's worth? And I got a different answer to the question I asked. Peter said, well, they'll pay 45 to 50. So what he meant by that was that two or three people who we might know of would probably pay for this house. Now, it was a lovely house, needed renovation. The family lived there since 1954 and was on 2 acres. But the thing that struck me about it was slightly surreal. The Mr. Duggan who just died, his wife Carmela died some years before her. 1979, 1980 Mini was still in the garage. And I was thinking to myself, well, I knew that her sister Annie, their parents were house builders. Connolly was Paddy McGilligan's wife, who was minister in the first government, and McGilligan obviously had introduced electricity to Ireland. So here was I in a house, Mrs. Duggan's house, that could be worth that type of money, yet her sister's husband had bought electricity to Ireland. So that struck me that moment as a very surreal experience. And a far cry from, I suppose, the times when the state was founded and that kind of stringency was applying. But
you've observed an awful lot over your 35 years and participated as well, and the kind of things that decisions and I suppose deals that people like you and in the business would be doing, they affect a lot of people's lives down the food chain, so to speak. What are your views, or what advice would you be offering if you were asked for it, and I'm sure you have been from time to time, about how there can be some sort of equilibrium in the housing market and access given to people with ordinary jobs?
Well, I suppose, first of all, we need a lot more imagination, and we also need a mindset of making things happen a lot quicker. So if you look at those two characteristics first, and then I think what you need to do is there's a target. Whether we obviously need to build a lot of houses in Ireland. That's something in the order of 35 to 40,000 a year. So the first thing you need to do is somebody needs to own that target on a regional basis. So it needs to be, in my view, broken down, and there needs to be a lot more collaboration with the public and private sector. I think it's a fact of life now that cities are growing a lot quicker than the cities are planning for it. So therefore, I think there needs to be no deregulation of housing standards. There needs to be more deregulation. More land needs to be zoned for planning.
But we had the chief executive of NAMA just a few weeks ago saying, look, there seemed to be hoarding going on, a lot of it. I mean, NAMA selling on enough land, was it for 60,000 houses, and then only 6,000 houses being built?
Well, there's a lot more being built now. Like our new home sales, for instance, in Dublin are up 37%. Year on year for the first 6 months, and I think our sales under 350,000 of new built houses up nearly 70%. So a lot more is being built. But there's after the crash we had, there's an innate conservatism both in the public sector and the private sector. So what we need is big schemes to be built, not just small schemes. And for big schemes to be built, that's taking risk. The promoters themselves have to take risks. The banks are probably more cautious while they are back lending. They're not going to actually open up the books and say you can borrow what you want. They want to see evidence of sales. So probably one of the problems is an innate conservatism on all sides, and that's something we need to tackle.
What's your view of the Help to Buy scheme? It's under review at the moment, and there seem to be indications that it's going to be dropped.
I think it's a positive thing. It's a good thing. I don't think it should be dropped. I think there's probably too much commentary in the housing market at the moment and not enough strategy.
Go back to the €58 million achieved for that price. That house, Walford in Shrewsbury Road, and it was well above even what your colleagues were predicting people would pay for it, as opposed to what it was worth. At that stage, did you see a crash coming?
Well, what I saw was that the Irish property market needed a correction, and our job always is for specific houses to get best possible price. But we also had a societal duty, and we do have a societal duty to actually publish what's happening. So that's what we do. Since 1996 in Dublin, and since 2000 for the country, we published a house price index which shows how house prices move every quarter without fear or favour. So I was concerned, and even that sale in itself should have sounded alarm bells. I mean, if you look in the following year, in 2006, the stock of my home in January was down 12% year on year in 2005, but by October it was up 67%. So as the historian Joe Lee said on one of in an RTE television programme, that all the facts were there, but they weren't pulled together.
You mentioned My Home. That's myhome.ie, a property site. I think you were one of the founders of that.
Yes.
And it was, I think Sherry FitzGerald bought about a quarter share of it.
That's right, yeah.
And you sold it in 2005 to the Irish Times for, give us the amount.
Well, it was actually 40 million.
40 million? I thought it was 50 million.
Well, I think it was close to 40 million.
Oh, sorry, there was an agreed price of 50, but the last 10 was dependent on whether it actually did good business.
Yeah, your search is good, Sean.
That must have been the best deal you ever did.
Well, I'm not sure.
And the worst deal, it wasn't even called daft.ie.
Just to be clear, we didn't own all of it. We owned a share of it, but it was a good deal. But it was probably a deal we did in London buying an estate agency. It was a much better deal, actually. Help rescue Sherry FitzGerald and put it in a good position to get through the recession.
But a property website, with a price tag of, call it 40, call it 50 million euro, bought by the Irish Times, it has to be the worst decision they ever made.
Well, I don't know. They sold a property in Delir Street, which, there weren't great buildings for a lot of money at the time. So that, they switched the money from Delir Street into a building they weren't using any longer into a
I wonder
website.
What if you were to ask them which would they prefer to have at this stage, the property in Delir Street or their website?
Well, it's a very good website, and it's still there leading the way.
What's it worth now?
Well, that's something I haven't contemplated. I don't look backwards, but it's obviously...
Well, if you're looking forward and thinking of buying it back off them, what would you offer?
I'm 60 years of age, and I'm probably more interested in doing other things, but it's not something I've
And you'd wish them the best. You wouldn't wish to mill with it, but it'd be a long time before they'll get that kind of investment.
But I mean, we all made mistakes. I remember in our business buying a site for a premises in Crumlin for $1.5 million, and when things took a downturn, we ended up selling for less than 200,000. So we all made mistakes. That's the nature of things. I don't think we should focus too much if we can get the Irish Times is in a reasonable place.
When was that, by the way, that Crumlin decision?
2005, Sean.
Right, I suppose a lot of things happened around 2000.
I should have got advice, shouldn't I?
A lot of things happened. Talk to a property expert. A lot of things happened in 2005. Yeah. Talk to me about politics. It's in your blood, going back to generations. Your father was Taoiseach. How involved were you working with him, for him, and maybe did you think about trying to succeed him in Dáil Éireann?
No, I didn't ever think of succeeding him. I was close to both my parents, but he was a difficult act to follow. So, I did contemplate it, but I said I was never going to emulate him, and I was doing something else in life. And I did learn a set of values from which I hope I have lived by in terms of my own business.
Tell me about your mother's influence on your father, Joan.
She was funny. She was challenging. She was great. She was hilarious, really. Very influential. Very protective of him. I suppose I used to have to keep not they got on very well, they're very close, but I used to have to keep the peace. She used to worry about him a little bit, and I suppose I would have to put it in a context for her.
She wouldn't be backward about coming forward with an opinion or two, I suppose.
No, she wouldn't, no.
And is it true that she had some favourites? I mean, Michael O'Leary, the late leader of the Labour Party, former Taoiseach, did she take him under her wing?
I don't know. She was a very warm person. I mean, I have to remember, ours was a public house in the sense people kept arriving at the door. So, somebody like Michael Leary might knock on the door, but he hadn't necessarily been asked to come along. It just happened. So the house was just like a railway station. And she welcomed all comers. She loved good company and good conversation and challenging conversation. So I suppose, on the other hand, my father was very much had a sense of purpose. He just wanted to get on with life and achieve the things that he'd set his mind to achieve.
And was there no appeal to you? Did politics as a if you like a participant electorally not appeal to you at all, or were you just too consumed by business?
No, it did appeal to me, and I did think about it. But as I said, I didn't think I was going to emulate him. I'd started doing something that was going reasonably well, and I was quite happy with it. And I thought I could actually, get involved with colleagues to change the industry I was in and to build a good business, and that's what I did. I obviously was involved in his, supporting him in his career for a long time.
Would you? Was it a case of you would have given him advice on some things, and he would have advised you as well?
He would have, yeah. No, he would. He'd tell me my market share was down. He'd be doing the tots on a Thursday's Irish Times, and yeah, he would. He didn't, just because you were young, he didn't respect, he didn't discount your opinion. He would prefer to listen to you when you were young, which was unusual for somebody of his time. Probably people of his era were generally more conservative.
Of course, in the back room, you were a trustee of Fine Gael. Are you still?
No.
And also you were a director of elections was it the 1997 campaign? 1997 election. John Bruton trying to get re-elected, and Bertie came in.
Yes.
What kind of an experience is it being director of elections for a party at national level?
It's full on, it's frenetic, and you find the things you can control are probably greater than the things you can control. So it's a reactive sport, and there's a lot of emotion, and I suppose life is put on hold. But I mean, the outcome is very important. I mean, I'm not saying this about Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil, but I think one of the problems this country had can have is when you get a one-party state where democracy really isn't functioning and governments don't change. So I do think if John Bruton and Fine Gael won that election, the Rainbow had won it, history might have been different.
Shane Kenny frequently says, and he was John Bruton's government press secretary, that his advice was, and if it had been taken again, the outcome might have been different, that Bruton should have waited until the autumn.
Possibly, yeah.
Before calling that election.
I was appointed director of elections at Easter. That decision was made, so you took the hand you're dealt with.
Yeah, and then you had, I suppose, the loss of power. But much more recently, you had a piece in the Irish Times last month ahead of the Fine Gael leadership election. Clearly, your sympathies lay with Simon Coveney in that.
I think my sympathies lay with the Just Society. I mean, I thought both Simon Coveney and Leo Varadkar were excellent candidates. I said, I think when you think about it, people of Britain would probably welcome with open arms either Leo Varadkar or Simon Coveney, or indeed some of our other politicians as Prime Minister right now. So they were both excellent candidates. Simon had shown an interest in the Just Society. Obviously, that was something that my father had.
Yeah, you better remind people, that was a Fine Gael concept that was introduced in the 1960s.
Yeah, well, it's the sort of mid-1960s by Declan Costello, where,
I suppose there was a lot of poverty in Ireland. There was very little opportunity, didn't have free education. People didn't have rights. People who were weak and vulnerable relied on charity. And I suppose what the Just Society of Fine Gael said, we need a rights-based society, not a society based on charity. And while you do have to create prosperity, the prosperity needs to be evenly shared when times are good, and the weak and vulnerable need to be protected when times aren't so good. And that's, I suppose, was the core of Just Society. And I suppose what Simon was saying was those principles of 50 years ago are as good today as they were then.
And how do you think, what's your judgment, Mark FitzGerald, on how well Fine Gael in government in the last 5-6 years have measured up to those ideals?
I think they measured up well, even though the people mightn't actually see that. I mean, I think that there were
people who've lost carers allowance or respite care, that kind of thing.
I understand that. Yeah, no, I understand that, and there's an awful lot of you can see those injustices, and I absolutely acknowledge those. But I think the job that Enda Kenny and Michael Noonan and indeed his colleagues in Labour like Eamon Gilmore and Pat Rabbitt and Rory Quinn did, they had experience and they had a terrible hand of cards to play, and what they did try to do their best to protect the vulnerable, but obviously they weren't able to do that because times were so bad in all cases, and those are the terrible cases you do hear about. And they're obviously political misjudgments. I mean, in politics, government is a highly pressurised, reactive sport, and you were put under a lot of pressure, so mistakes were made, but in the overall context I think they did a good job.
Now, you mentioned that the British people would be happy to have either Simon Coveney or Leo Varadkar as Prime Minister, given what they've been through. What do you think of Leo?
I think Leo's very clever. I think he's got a huge grasp of policy. I think he's obviously quite charming. I think he comes from a fascinating background. I think he's got great energy, and I think he's going to be a very good Taoiseach for the country. We
were talking an hour or so ago, a little more, to Pascal Donoghue, who's Finance and Public Expenditure Minister, about the change they've made. Is he maybe more of a risk taker than Simon Coveney might have been, particularly say with only going half the road with Michael Noonan on their rainy day fund, 500 million instead of $1 billion a year?
I think we need to be, Michael Noonan was an ex-Minister for Finance, became in with a defensive job, and I think what Pascal Donoghue is now trying to be is more offensive. We do need to spend a lot more money on infrastructure. And we need more imagination in government. I think it wasn't possible to do that, but it's now possible to be more imaginative, more creative, and to actually try and deal with some of the issues, because we've got crisis after crisis, and the people's tolerance with the incompetence of things not being delivered properly is something that we're all conscious of. I think the government need to tackle that and deliver services that are efficient and infrastructure that actually works for the country.
No doubt you would want to see Fine Gael being in power, 3 Dáil in a row. And
I think I was brought up to see fairness in politics. I think Fine Gael are good and are doing a good job. I think it is important there's competition in politics. I think when you look at, said earlier, when you have little change of little choice in government, in reality it doesn't do a country any good. And indeed I think Britain became dominated by by the Labour Party, by Thatcher. The Labour Party under Blair, I don't think it was necessarily good. By Thatcher, it wasn't necessarily good. And I don't think the kind of domination the Tories had until recently was actually good for Britain either.
But do you think, the observation has been made that Fine Gael is in office but not necessarily in power because of the minority situation it's in, and that...
Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That can be a good thing. If that leads to less adversarial politics, I think that's a good thing. If there's more consultation, more cross-party cooperation, and people actually look at the issues rather than the personalities, we might get a better politics out of it, Sean.
Ultimately, though, could you see, and again, your parents came from different traditions, your mother coming from a Northern Presbyterian background, I think.
Grandmother.
I beg your pardon, sorry. But I'm just wondering, could you see sort of the Grand Coalition coming together, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and none of this sort of pirouetting around competence on supply?
I suppose they're cooperating at the moment, which is a good thing, but I don't think it would be good for the country if the two main parties came together, because I think competition is important. So I think having two parties at the centre is a good thing for Ireland, and we should continue to challenge our politicians. We should also celebrate the fact we've got a centre-ground politics and we don't have a right-wing media.
Right, and it's not today or yesterday since the late John Kelly used to talk about the Grand Coalition, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, just governing, sort of in line with the wishes of the vast majority of the people. And that was a time, I think, when Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael shared, was it 80% of the support?
80% of support,
50% in the last election.
I couldn't see, I couldn't see my father and Charlie High sitting at the same cabinet table for long, so I don't think that would have worked anyway.
Stranger things have happened, haven't they?
Well,
Des O'Malley managed it, I suppose. And
Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness.
Yes, it did indeed.
Strange things have happened. Mark FitzGerald, look, enjoy your retirement. What are you going to do with your extra time, even though you're still going to be chairing those meetings?
Well, I'm going to be still involved in the business. I suppose I need to lose a bit of weight, get fit. I'm going to.
God, you've been talking about that for a long time.
I have. I'm going to do something about it now, and I've got to. I've got a house in Mayo. I've a large enough family, so I've enough things to be keeping myself busy with.
Well, look, Gamara to Cade, as they say. Mark FitzGerald, enjoy your retirement. Thank you so much indeed for coming in.
Sure.
We'll hear about a facelift and reimagination for the National Library after the break.
Today with Sean O'Rourke on RTE.